serpents, ye offspring of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send to you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them ye shall kill and crucify, and some of them ye shall scourge in your synagogues and persecute them from city to city. That upon you.
Good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. My name is Paul Strangini. Okay. Hope the sound is all right. Okay. We were last talking about, he said, fill ye up the measure of your fathers. He was drawing a line between the Pharisees of his time and, of course, the men who killed the prophets. And, if we had been in the days of our forefathers, we would not have killed the prophets. But in so saying, a lot of times we want to take ownership of our ancestors, right? Like, it's very common. Like people who have never really accomplished anything in their life will talk about America, for example, as if they had something to do with it. As if they had something to do with the way the country is and what it has become. When someone, pride in your country, in your, family history, whatever. Like, I often say, the pleasure you feel in being associated with someone who in the past did something great is, it can be a tricky thing. You can put too much, if you start becoming prideful of yourself for being their descendant, you've descended into some sort of self-delusion about your own importance. And they also, in seeking to associate themselves with their forefathers, they haven't also owned the negative aspect of their forefathers. They killed the prophets. And that can go too far too. I mean, whatever. I'm not gonna get into that, but use your imagination. But it goes too far in this sense. The Jesus' disciples were also the descendants of men who doubtless had something to do with the killing of the prophets. Oh no, they weren't, Paul. Wait a second. No. I just realized I'm like, no, Paul, you can't say that. Because, because of what he's about to say. He's about to say, you are a generation of vipers. Or as I said in my song, and you heard that, offspring. And I translated offspring because that's what it means. But that is not to say that you ought to take it literally. And it goes back to something I say about interpretation, that you're often confronted with a choice where it can't be everything's literal. It's one or the other. And I'll get into that in a moment. I felt like I wanted to say something more about where I was going with that, but let's just bring up the verse here. You serpents, ye generation of vipers, offspring of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them ye shall kill and crucify, and some of them ye shall scourge in your synagogues, and persecute them from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom ye slew between the temple and the altar. I'm going to hold on there. Let's leave that other verse for a separate consideration. So, I was saying before, is where it goes too far. Let's just say, without regard to trying to address the whole, is it literal, is it figurative question. Where blaming someone for their ancestors' deeds goes too far is when they are not in agreement with them. He knows that they have a murderous intent towards him, just like their fathers. We are, if we were in the days of our fathers, we wouldn't do the evil that they did. but they're intending murder towards Jesus, and they think it's justified. And that's why he condemns them, because they are of the same. They are not merely the flesh and blood descendants of them that killed the prophets. They're also the what was the word I wanted? That's like not mental. They're they are the sinful descendants. How about that? They are the descendants of the same mindset, the same outlook, the same perspective, the same spirits. They're the spiritual descendants. That's what would probably be the best way to say it, of them that killed the prophets. And, because it's not like there weren't prophets killed in other nations, or, good men put to death who tried to warn their people against things. I mean, is it just a problem that the Jews have? Blaming someone for the deeds of their ancestors, like I said, well, I think I covered this, succinctly put it, it's only appropriate if they continue in the same spiritual place as their ancestors, having the same, willingness to do evil, the same sinful desires, the same, all that. But if they have reformed, if they have a different perspective, if they're following Jesus, you wouldn't call them offspring of serpents, offspring of vipers. Now, I only feel like I have to address this because I don't know who could be listening, and since I have a history, I used to be a student of Arnold Murray, and he's a big serpent seed teacher. There's something called the serpent seed out there. And this is a passage they would use. And so if they looked up this study, they might be interested in seeing what I had to say about it. And, hold on one second. All right. And, how can you justify, it says offspring. Why shouldn't I take that literally? It seems to be, it's one way you can take it, right? You could take it that way. It's not obvious that it should be symbolic, though literal is kind of weird, right? And what they'll say is like, look at it. It says the blood shed from Abel. And so there we got Cain. And according to the serpent seed doctrine, Cain was literally fathered by the devil, even though in Genesis 4 verse 1 it says Adam was Cain's father. And that is the beginning of Cain's genealogy. It says Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And then there's a parenthesis where it explains how then it talks about, and she again bare Abel. And then there's a section where it talks about how Cain murdered Abel. And then it continues to say, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. I believe it was Enoch, whatever, his son. I don't need to check. I'll just say Enoch. If I'm wrong, then you can say, oh, you were wrong, Paul. So how do you determine you're going to take it literal? Well, one of the passages I rely on to understand that is one the serpent seed teachers also rely on, John chapter 8. And I'm going to bring it up here with from my Bible collection software. And you can see the whole section there. Hopefully it's not too small. If you're on a mobile device, maybe it is. But in verse 831, Jesus says to the Jews which believed on him, if you continue in my word, then you are my disciples indeed, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Okay? And without analyzing that, they answer him, we be Abraham's seed, and we're never in bondage to any man. How do you say we shall be made free? See, they looked at themselves as freeborn and never been bondage. Though this is kind of off because, well, they couldn't say historically they'd never been in bondage because the Hebrews story is that they were in bondage in Egypt. But they may be thinking of themselves personally. We are Abraham's seed. We come from a noble line, and We've never been in bondage, at least us personally. How do you say we're going to be free? Like, how are we somehow in need of being free? Even though they were under the heel of the Romans and they were being dominated by them, what's obvious here is they're a bit touchy about this question. And he answers and says, "Verily I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is a servant of sin. And the servant abideth not in the house forever, but the Son abideth ever. If the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed." There's a interplay there with it where he talks about the Son, like the Son abide. The servant does not abide if you are the servant of sin, but he that is the Son abides forever. It's just a double meaning, because then he refers to himself. In both cases, if you are the son of sin, you abide forever in sin. But if you're serving sin, implying an unwillingness, you can be made free by the Son of Righteousness, who is Jesus. So I don't know. And then the first, usually I took this as both references to the Son referring to Jesus. It may, but I just saw a different way of looking at it. But it's not important to this discussion. Well, one thing I'll say is, this is spiritually speaking, right? He's all, this is talking about sin and continuing in His word. That's not. If you continue in my word, you are my disciples indeed. They believed on Him. And then the next verse he says, "I know that ye are Abraham's seed." Now, that's either literal or figurative. "But you seek to kill me, because my word hath no place in you. I speak that which I have seen with my father. You do that which you have seen with your father." So he delineates dual fathers. He says, "I know you're Abraham's seed, but you seek to kill me because my word has no place in you. And I speak that which I have seen with my father, and you do that which you have seen with your father." And they answered and said to him, "Abraham is our father." Jesus said unto them, "If ye were Abraham's children, ye would do the works of Abraham." So now he's sort of denying that they are the children of Abraham. But the question is, does he mean they are spiritually the children, not the children of Abraham, or literally not the children of Abraham? The people who teach serpents, would say, no, he means they are literally not the children of Abraham. I mean, they were actually a different race of people. Because serpent seed doctrine is all about racism against the Jews, essentially. It's saying the Jews are the children of the devil in a very special way, because it is to say that they are literally descended from the devil. And it's wrong. Though any particular Jew might be a child of the devil if he does the devil's deeds. All right? It doesn't mean they're immune or anything. But if you're the child of Abraham, you do what Abraham does. If you don't, you're kind of your claim to be the child of Abraham is spiritually suspect. You seek to kill me, a man that told you the truth, which I have learned of God. This did not Abraham. You do the deeds of your father. And they said to him, we're not born of fornication. We have one Father, even God. We weren't conceived out of wedlock. Maybe they even have an idea of the idea of that they may be taking this literally. And Jesus said, "No, hold on. If God were your Father, you would love me." And in a sense, they also are saying, when they say we have one Father, they mean that obviously spiritually. And then, if God were your Father, you would love me, for I proceed forth and came from God. Why do you not understand my speech? Even because you cannot hear my word. Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning. They would flag that as a reference to Cain. But that says the devil was a murderer from the beginning, not the first murderer was Cain. And abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own. For he is a liar and the father of it. Okay. Now, he had earlier said they were Abraham's seed. If he is now saying they are not literally Abraham's seed, but they are literally the devil's seed, then what did he mean when he said, I know that you are Abraham's seed? I know that you are Abraham's seed. Does he mean that spiritually? So they were spiritually followers of Abraham. I mean, that makes no sense. Then like, okay, they spiritually wanted to follow Abraham. They spiritually wanted to follow Jesus. But because of their carnal, who they were descended from, they couldn't hear Jesus. They didn't believe him. Or at least they didn't believe him in this. I remember he's talking to a bunch of people. He's talking to Jews that believe on him, or some more than others, or less than others. I don't know. But then, which verse was that? I know that you are Abraham's seed, in verse 37. That's got to be either spiritual or literal. It can't be both. And you can't have that be... If that's spiritual, then the other one is literal. And that's not very sensible to say, well, they were spiritually Abraham's seed. Someone who's spiritual, I'm spiritually the child of Abraham. If you believe in Jesus, you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise, according to the Apostle Paul. So being spiritually the children of Abraham is what every Gentile believer is. It's a desirable state. But Jesus is being highly critical of them. So I say it cannot, the Abraham seed part, he's saying, I know you are literally descended from Abraham. I know that. You take a lot of pride, but you don't do his works. You follow out, you're in bondage to sin. You do things that Abraham would never do. You're more like the devil. You're like Cain. Because they are spiritually the brothers of Cain. That comparison isn't being drawn for nothing. To Cain and to the murdering. That's why he says all the blood will come upon you, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zacharias, because it's a spiritual combine, I guess. I'm not what else you would call it. It's a spiritual family. That's better. Combine. It's a spiritual family. It's a spiritual family, just like the family of Abraham. We become adopted into it. And thereby become adopted into the family of God, because that's what being a child of Abraham is all about. That's why they say we have one Father, even God. And it's a shame I have to go into such detail about this because of false doctrine. The Pharisees and such were not literally the children of the devil. They were literally descended from Abraham. But spiritually, they were closer to Cain and Satan, sure. The seed of the devil is a spiritual seed. Just like the seed of God is a spiritual seed. 1 John chapter 3 talks about the seed of God. If you have the seed of God in you, you don't sin, because the seed of God remains in you and it keeps you from sinning. That's the ultimate. Like when you have God's seed in you, forming the new man, which is Christ, and it's growing and filling you in, so to speak. And that's very powerful, and it's important teaching of Christianity. And I have a teaching on this subject where I go into great detail, and I recommend you can get it on my website. I'll just show you where it is, because I can. Ta-da. Okay. I'm on the studies page. Just click on the studies page. And you go down. And it's one of the earlier ones, I think, is like number 4. Number 3. It's a 2-hour study. Did it a couple of years ago. Does the devil have children in this world? What is the biblical teaching in regards to the children of God and the children of the devil? Because there is a serpent seed. It's spiritual and it's an important teaching, and I certainly do not deny the reality of that, But I do deny that it is a literal, that Satan actually fathered children by impregnating Eve. I deny that. Let's go back. I didn't do this morning, and this is unfortunate, is get my get the chat window open, because I like to be able to check that. Okay, what's wrong here? Okay, that's not right. Sorry about this. It's kind of like a hectic morning. Oh boy. I just want to be, I mean, it hardly ever gets anything in there, but if someone posts in there, I hate missing it. There we go. You can see all the blood and guts there. Okay. Now back to business. Okay. So, I guess when he says this, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, I'm actually curious, very briefly, to find out, when he says, all these things shall come on this generation, if that is the same word, I think it is, genos, probably something like that. But, you know, how can they be guilty of all? You know, why should they be held responsible also for the blood of Abel and the blood of Zacharias? And I'm asking that question of myself as I think about it, because it's not like I prepared an answer. It's something to think about. Yeah, okay. So it's important to note also the word, again, I went too far. You know, the blood of righteous blood from Abel, is it all coming on the Pharisees in their generation? That's what's confusing to people. But the word generation is the same as above. You offspring of vipers. On this family. Not the Jews, but indeed the family of the devil. The family of, you know, the servants of sin. Those who abide forever in the house of sin, forever in the house of whatever. And so, who is in that family? Cain, the murderers of Zacharias, son of Barachias, the murderers of Jesus. It does not, because the word means like race, offspring. What was the other word? Generation means race, family, generation. I like family. Race gets a bit, you know, it's a deadly word there, but a family of murderers. He's lumping all murderers together and saying they are one family, and all the blood that they've shed is coming down on all of them. You know, they sort of end up with this sort of collective responsibility. I don't know that it's on each individual. Like, each individual is not like, the Pharisees aren't per se responsible for the blood of Abel. But it comes upon them because they follow in the same footsteps. It's the same story being told over and over. You know, they believed in Jesus in John chapter 8. But they quickly turn against him. Why is that? Because of the resentment, jealousy. Because he says things, he tells them hard things they don't want to hear. It's because when Messiah comes, he's doing miracles and like, wow, miracles. But then he says, you people need to reform. You are in danger of hellfire. And they've been so used to being top dogs and stuff. And who is he? Some country bumpkin? How dare he come? Even that, like even though he's doing miracles, in their minds it makes it even worse that the legitimate Messiah would show up, and their hearts are hardened against him to destroy him. Because it takes, you know, murder and killing can happen for all kinds of reasons. Like, you know, two men could be in a fight, and one kills the other. You know, but what it takes to murder a righteous man, the malevolence, the resentment, the hatred, that goes back to Cain. Cain hated his brother Abel because his deeds. Because why did he slay him? It says so. Wherefore slew he him? Because his own works were evil and his brother's righteous. Because the conviction that comes upon them when they discover that their works are evil and their brothers are righteous. You know, their sacrifices are not acceptable to God, and their brothers' sacrifices are. You know, the publicans and the harlots enter into the kingdom of God, and they are shut out. These things start happening, and instead of repenting, they become hardened against it and angry, resentful, and murderous. And that's why it's very dangerous to say, well, if I'd been back then, I wouldn't have participated in the murder of the prophets, the murder of Abel, the murder of Jesus. You know, you never been resentful? You never seen yourself full of resentment? You never had anything wrong done to you? Until you, not necessarily wrong even, but like, you never been humiliated for your faults? Have you been, you know, until you face humiliation and a kind of, you know, having to fail and be exposed that way. Until you've dealt with those emotions, don't be too hasty to utter anything about what you think you're capable of or not. Because it's better to know what you're capable of. Like the Apostle Paul was fully capable of persecuting the church and resenting them for whatever, you know. That was even, he thought he was doing good. He was very zealous. A lot of times people say they think they're doing good, or they say that the reason they're doing it is good. Like a lot of people, like the communists of the last century, they're motivated, they said, by compassion for the poor. But then when you see how they went about killing people who were not by any means rich, you know, they went after all the common. You know, many people were murdered in the course of that, like, you know, just for thoughts. It's very clear that what they were really after was power, and what really motivated them was resentment of those that were successful. And same thing motivates people today when they play class against class. There's a resentment. And so someone who, like Abel, you know, is sacrificing, doing things right, prospering, and God is blessing. You know, his brother looks on him and sees the mess he's made out of his life and hates him and destroys him. Not for, you know, any compassion. It just has to do with his own hatred of someone else's success. It's powerful. You know, and when you fail and another succeeds at the same thing, how does it make you feel? You know, go through that and see how you feel. It's good to experience things in life like that, because it helps you know what you're capable of, and then you can pray and try to, you know, you can examine yourself if you're of the mindset to examine yourself and to try to figure out what's wrong. Why am I so resentful? Why am I so angry? All these things shall come upon this generation, this family. In this family, all these things, woe unto you. The blood that you have shed. As the Lord said to Cain, your brother's blood cries unto me from the earth. The earth which hath received, or what was the exact wording? I want to know. The earth which hath received your brother's blood. Maybe I'm just getting overly poetic with it. Yeah. The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. What hast thou done? Okay. Subscribe to Line by Line Bible Studies. And click on the like button while you're at it. If you've already subscribed, just click on the like button for this video. And then these are linked in the description below. There's my website. There's my other YouTube channel. If you have a question, you do not want to put it into if you do not wish to use the live chat during the study, you can send it to me at questions@oraclesofgod.org. That's also linked in the description below, I believe. And there's no questions in the chat. If you want to ask me something in the comments, beware, I may not. Until this channel, unless this channel, let's say, not until, unless this channel was really busy, I would answer every question that comes. So if you post a question in the comments and I don't get it, you might want to shoot me an email, because I will address them. All right. Verse 37. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and you would not. And then what is that referring to? That's, well, I've sent you prophets and wise men and scribes, and you kill and crucify them. You know? The prophets, I mean, Lord. Read the prophets. I've done, well, study the prophets maybe because they're hard to read. That's what I found when I tried to study the prophets when I was 19. I was like, well, what's all this about? Very confusing because I didn't know the historical context. And the first time you're going through the Bible is very, people make it through Genesis, Exodus, and then they get to the law, and, and then you might read Kings and Chronicles and Samuel and Joshua, Judges. That's easy reading because it's all narrative stories. But then you get to the prophets, and it can be very confusing. A lot of symbology, what are they talking about? What are they referring to? There's current events of their time, and how do you apply that to now? And it's important to understand the historical context, because that's what, putting things into context helps us actually process things so that we can apply them to now. Because if we don't know how it was being applied at that time, just pulling a verse out of context is not going to help. And this happens all the time. Especially in fundamentalism, it's like, it's funny. I was in an argument with not an argument, but just talking to. But we were in contrary positions, and this guy was a former fundamentalist atheist. He was a fundamentalist Christian who turned into an atheist. And he was trying to tell me I wasn't a real Christian because of my views about the scripture. Because I said, like, well, everything isn't literal. He's like, no, it's impossible to reconcile. He was just saying the Bible is so full of contradictions you can't reconcile. Like, like I was showing you, I know that you are Abraham's seed, you are the children of the devil. That when you have to have everything literal, that becomes, and most fundamentalists aren't that way. But people don't like the fact that you have to go in and interpret things and make decisions like that. Like when Jesus says, "Think not I am come to destroy the law." Because I can argue endlessly with people, and they'll always go back to that verse. And really the sense in which Jesus said that, "Think not I am come to destroy the law." Let's call it fulfilling. That's literally the way that's to be taken. And I didn't even, when we did this book, I hadn't even really come to that view. I mean, I do believe that Jesus did away with the law. I have a study on my website called How Christ Abolished the Law, or something like that. How in Christ the law has become abolished. And this manifests. I mean, Christians from the time of Paul have been not circumcising themselves, have been not following the dietary restrictions. I mean, some do, but this is after the fact. At the time, they weren't doing that. At the time, you read the Apostle Paul, he says, one man honors one day above another man honors every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. Are you called being circumcised? Don't seek to be uncircumcised. Are you called being uncircumcised? Don't seek to be circumcised. You don't have to do all this stuff with the law of Moses. We're following after a higher spiritual calling, a spiritual interpretation, the law of Christ. And that's been going on forever in Christianity, for all time. And so when you tell people, well, the law is abolished, they're like, whoa, Jesus said, I'm not come to destroy the law. He said, think not, I am come to destroy the law. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Because then he says that, he said in the same context that, not one jot or tittle of the law will pass away until all be fulfilled. But he came to fulfill it. Did he fulfill it or not? If he did fulfill it, then there remains the possibility that that it was done away. You gotta also remember the writings of Paul came out first. The Gospels were written like 40 years later. So it's not like the Gospels were written and then Paul came along and changed everything. That's what a lot of people believe because of the sequence in the book. But the letters and the epistles came first. The Gospels actually were written down later. So the idea that they would then, 40 years after Paul has been established as after they'd had all this out, the Council of Jerusalem, all this stuff in Acts you read about, in some way, shape, or form has all transpired. And then they're going to write a gospel where it says, I'm not come to destroy the law. And none of them are honoring the Sabbath the way the Jews do. They're not circumcising their children. They're not abstaining from eating. They're using their conscience to be their guides instead of the law of Moses. That doesn't make logical sense. So, he sent them prophets, he sent them wise men, he sent them scribes. You read the prophets, that was all based on read the prophets. Okay. Read the prophets. Like Jeremiah, it's like, he says, hearken unto me and live. There's so many earnest calls in the prophets for them to give heed, to listen to God, if they would live. The law even calls the law of Moses. The law of Moses is still profitable reading if you read it right. It's more like guidelines, though. It's a schoolmaster. It's not the thing we use to order our lives. We use the New Testament and the Spirit of God in us. Because there are so many, the law doesn't cover everything. That's why they made all those loopholes. It's like, well, you should never kill a man, but you can certainly call him a fool. And then that becomes, I can just be abusive to everyone. And many Christians are like that. I mean, they are. There's a lot of people who are really abusive in their language towards other people and towards other believers, unbelievers. Especially towards other believers, because I guess we have this sort of idea that an other believer must somehow, we expect more of them. And when they do not live up to our standards, we, it's kind of like the way, family tend to hurt each other more than strangers. And for some, the people that are closest to you, are more willing to risk getting angry. If it's someone who's really close to you, you're more willing because of the proximity, the intensity is increased. Or if a stranger touches your life, though, it can cause you to lose your temper. If they get close and they do something harmful, So, the example I had in mind there is, I didn't say it, but it's like, I remember one time I got a check and I went to the bank and they didn't want to put it in because it was just made out to my last name. And they didn't want to do it. And then they started saying it was because of 9/11, which is nonsense. You know how I know it's nonsense? Because when I stormed out, definitely stormed out, angry, telling them I'd be back the next day to close all my accounts, they called me at home and said, "Oh, we'll make an exception." Well, if it's 9/11, you don't get to make an exception, because if it's the law, it's the law. The law doesn't say like, okay, all checks have to be this way. It's like, but not if they get angry. What I'm saying is, like, that's someone who's not close to me, but they made me angry because they were like touching me in a time I needed to put that money in the bank. It was important to me, so I got a little annoyed. I didn't say anything I shouldn't have said, but I was definitely heated. So I wanted to gather you under my wings like a chicken gathers her, or like a hen gathers her chickens, her little chicks. But you weren't willing. He sent the prophets, And that's what they called him to. They said, repent, and he offered them this. Just as today, the gospel goes forth, and he offers people, come to me. But they would rather not. They'd rather pursue their own ways. Behold, your house is left to you desolate. Referring to the temple, he's calling it your house. He had earlier said, my house should be called the house of prayer, but you have turned it into a den of thieves. And then he has they come tempting him, they have these arguments. This is kind of his final judgment on them, and he says, your house is left to you desolate. And the house would be destroyed. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Jerusalem became like a pagan city. I forgot what the temple to Jupiter or some other of the Roman gods was placed on the Temple Mount for a time. For I say unto you, you shall not see me henceforth till you shall say, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Yeah, I'm not sure what he means by that precisely. You know what I mean? Like, you will not see me henceforth until you shall say, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. I guess until you are willing to welcome the one whom God has sent. Until the prophet comes and you receive him as the Ninevites did in the book of Jonah. He came telling them to repent of their wicked way, and they're like, what? What do we need to, what is wrong? What are we doing wrong? God is going to destroy, someone comes with a warning. And it's funny to me, it's interesting. Human beings are such interesting things, For example, like, for some people, not getting into the truth or untruth of the question at all, right? We look at something like global warming. Some people are like, we got to change everything because the earth is going to turn into a hothouse and all the polar bears are going to die and all the ice is going to melt, the seas are going to rise, and all our wonderful coastal cities will be underwater. Boo-hoo. I'm sorry for making a joke about that. But all this is going to happen, and so the prophets of doom and gloom come and say, this is what's happening. And some people are like, what do we need to do? We got to repent. We got to change our ways, Other people are like, they're skeptical. Well, what proof do you have? What sign will you show us that these things are true? And, and then they say, well, we've got, models, I guess, or whatever. It's not the word of God, so it's a lot more sketchy. So, but all the prophets agree. This is going to be terrible. We're going up in flames. I don't know. Yeah, it's terrible. Just doom. Doom is upon us. All the prophets agree. A lot of times, that's not the case. I don't want to get into that. Well, I would get into it, sort of. This is what I'll say about global warming. It's like everything's based on models. So that's like me saying to you, the earth is round, and you say, prove it. And I say, well, I've got a globe. You know what I mean? Well, this globe here, see it's round? That proves the earth is round. Well, you made the globe. You know what I mean? It's a manufactured thing. So that's about how useful I think models are. Or they're of similar utility. It's garbage in, garbage out. That's all I'm going to say about that. But I just find it interesting. But I like the analogy, though. The prophets come forth. Doom is upon us. And some people receive it. Some people receive it not. And if they're true prophets, not receiving them is foolish. But how do you know? How can you tell the difference? Well, the Word of God says, if a prophet say something's going to happen and it doesn't happen, they're not a true prophet. And you shouldn't believe them. You certainly can be, when it comes to science, you can be skeptical. If they make predictions and they don't come true, your skepticism is warranted. Because I would say, I remember going to school, we had this program called CARE, and other kids were participated in this CARE thing, and they'd come and give us all this propaganda about how all the oil was going to run out before the year 2000, how by the year 2000 we would all be wearing special suits to protect us from the giant hole in the ozone layer. There's all this really horrible stuff, that was supposed to happen. And, I remember seeing Al Gore's movie. Found it very compelling at the time. I was like, wow, I'm like, maybe there's something to this. Except it's already supposed to all be over. We're supposed to be, we didn't do what we were supposed to do, and we're supposed to be all destroyed. So there's a Chicken Little effect. Chicken Little, the sky is falling, and the sky isn't falling. Or the little boy who cried wolf, actually. Because didn't they get caught up in Chicken Little's little thing? I don't remember. My dad used to tell me a story about Chicken Little and the little boy who cried wolf. Those are stories he actually liked a lot, because it's an important lesson. If we render ourselves unbelievable through being wrong all the time, predicting false things, if it's like the prophets today of Christianity. They've been predicting we're in the end times and saying we're in the end times since I was a child. End time, or they're right around the corner, or just Jesus is going to come any time now. Right? They've been doing that for years, and after a while, I guess if you just keep on in that mode, eventually you could be right, or you will be right eventually. At least I believe, but you're wrong. It's like it's like when they flip a coin and you always choose heads. Eventually, you're going to get a head. You're not going to throw a million tails in a row. That's highly improbable. A broken clock is right twice a day, they say. Right? Because it's 12. It's 12. It's 12. Well, eventually it will be 12. But that doesn't mean the clock is of any use. It's right twice a day. Oh. And prophets that are right once in a while are no use. No utility. They need to welcome the man that comes in the name of the Lord. That's how I got on that thing. It's like, because some people, the prophets of the climate have come, and we welcome them. What say you? The earth is doomed unless we stop whatever. I don't even know what exactly they want. We gotta tax the heck out of everything. I don't know what I'm talking about this. I guess because it occurred to me as far as like examples of modern prophets that are received in a vein different than the prophets I always refer to, which is the end times prophets, which have been going on forever. I mean, you go back to 1800s, there's prophets. That's how the Seventh-day Adventists got started. There was what was it called? The Disappointment of 1830, something like that. Great Disappointment. They had some big calendar. They figured that Jesus was going to come, or the end times were going to be, or whatever. 1830, something like that. And then, oops, didn't happen. And a lot of people have been caught up in it, but despite the failure prediction, they managed to form a denomination out of it. So there you go. Talking about dead men's bones, built on the failures of your fathers. Well, we'll start chapter 24, even though we only got 10 minutes. That's all right. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. The whole thing's been done, this whole section's been in the temple. They're questioning him in the temple. He's giving them the woes in the temple. And now they depart from the temple. And as they're going out, they're like, look, and they're from the country. And Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. The temple was destroyed after Jesus was crucified within 40 years. Now I remember in my original instruction in the Word, one of the things that Arnold Murray used to point out was that the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall as it is known, is still there. But it isn't, and the point was like, well, see, that then Jesus couldn't have been referring to Titus destroying the temple, because there's still stones upon stones. I think that may be taking it a little too literally. As far as where's the temple? And where are the buildings of the temple? That's the platform on which it was sitting. Remember, Arnold Murray suggested that it would be turned to sand. They're getting a new coating of sand. It's going to be completely wiped out. Perhaps. I don't know. I mean, that's one way you could look at it. I'll just say that. But I don't find that very compelling. I think the destruction in the first century fits quite well. That is not to say that I don't believe there may be another temple built there. Because the Antichrist is supposed to sit down in the temple of God and make a show of himself that he is God. And that's what this next chapter is going to be about. To some degree. And I believe it is, this chapter is a prophetic chapter in the time of Jesus, but it remains a prophetic chapter. And things found in this chapter also are found in the book of Revelation. And there was a sort of an end of an era at the time of Jesus. I mean, the Jews were slaughtered and scattered to all the nations of the world, or at least the Roman world, and somewhat beyond even. Because there were Jews that wound up in China and Africa, all over the place. They were really sent out and away from their homeland. And that continued again for nearly 2,000 years until the thing is there were some Jews who remained occupying Israel in small numbers throughout history, but the majority of Jews were shipped out. In every captivity, there was always this tiny little remnant that was left behind, and but during the period when Jerusalem was under Roman domination after it was destroyed, and also subsequently the Parthians, and subsequently the Parthians, and then the Turks, and also the Ottoman Turks. Whatever, I skipped a few dominations. Okay, but there would be a small number of Jews in Jerusalem certainly during the Ottoman Turkish times. It wasn't under Jewish control by any means. Most Jews had been scattered and dispersed. This happened because the Romans found them so troubling in their desire to have their nation. I mean, one thing you gotta say, it's funny because I find it a little hypocritical sometimes. Because the Jews are the most nationalistic kind, not all of course, but they have an extremely nationalistic outlook when it comes to Israel. They're very pro their nation, and I got nothing against that. Because the last century, someone tried to kill them all, and some people dispute that, but I think that's nonsense. There's definitely a concerted effort made to kill the Jews, a lot of them, anyways, right? A very ridiculously large number of them were killed in a not just killed, but in a systematic industrial way. They were murdered. I mean, essentially, it wasn't like they were just war casualties in the Holocaust. So it's like giving them a nation seems like they need some place where they can. Of course, it does concentrate them. It's like if their nation was ever overrun again, the chances of annihilation are way up high. Of course, they still have a diaspora, which is what they call the Jews who are separated into all the. Like there's a lot of Jews in America. There's not so many in Europe, but there's some. England, they're still around in different nations. They're not all there. I think most of them would be found in the U.S. outside of Israel, probably. I mean, that's where I would be if I had to, fear that much that people wanted to destroy me and my nation just because I was, whatever, Italian. Pick one of my ethnicities. So, but it's somewhat hypocritical because in the sense of like everyone else is supposed to be part of an international community and open their doors to all the, all the people who want to go into their countries, but they sort of reserved for themselves. At least I feel this sometimes when I hear people talk about it. I feel this sort of slightly hypocritical thing. And I don't know what to make of it. I personally, it's like, to me, it's like I feel somewhat patriotic about my nation, America, but my first loyalty is to Christ. So, I mostly am interested in my nation remaining free and in not being transformed into some sort of socialist anti-paradise, where your speech becomes, it's already starting to sort of happen a bit, it's like with like the wedding cake bakers and all that. It's like, where it's like you can't refuse to do something you find morally objectionable, or it's going to move into you can't say certain things about certain people because it's hurtful, because they don't like hearing it. No, because they resent being called sinners. And that resentment will turn into murder if you keep insisting on saying, our nation is turned down a sinful path. Children shouldn't be sexualized at a young age. You should, it's abuse to do some of the things they're starting to do to children, to modify them and to destroy their identity, basically, and to mess with their minds, basically messing with reality. Trying to say there's like, oh, well, you're a boy, well, you might be a girl, or whatever, all that nonsense. But like, you interfere with that, you say you want to be able to talk about that and say it's nonsense. Well, they want to pass laws and to make it so you can't. They don't want you to speak against things. They don't want you to say things that make them uncomfortable. And that is important to me. I want to be free to do that. Now, some people, I had friends say, but Paul, hey, that means if they start persecuting you, you rejoice. I will when they start persecuting me. But that doesn't mean I necessarily just walk hopefully into it. It seems irresponsible. It's not just me, it's other people. It's not just that I need to speak the truth. It's I want other people to be able to speak the truth. Because, it's like, it's a question of not just me, but my neighbor and my fellow man. Just because I would endure some injustice doesn't mean I should stand by and allow injustice to be done to other people. For example, like when the Apostle Paul, had the coats of those that stoned Stephen laying at his feet, it made him culpable because he stood by and was assenting to it, to the death of Stephen. So that, you could say, hey, none of his business. It's all of our business to some degree. Okay, so we'll probably pick up at verse 3 on Monday. Sorry if this was a little, I did not feel that well this morning. So, anyways, thanks for joining me in this study. Oops. I'm only at 57 minutes, but I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for joining me in this study. I look forward to studying with you again on Monday, perhaps earlier. I don't know. Okay. And we'll just, something else.